The Serpent'S Kiss. Part 1. The First Domino. Becky watched the dawn break, a canvas of bruised purples and fiery oranges bleeding across the Manhattan skyline. The city, still largely asleep, held its breath, unaware of the meticulously woven tapestry of destruction she was about to unleash. Her reflection in the penthouse window showed a woman of serene composure, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing within. It had been 6 months since the seed of her grand design was planted, a seed watered by years of simmering resentment and a thirst for absolute control. Today, the first bloom would unfurl, drenched in blood. She thought of Josh, her husband, currently in a drunken stupor in their opulent master bedroom, likely dreaming of the promotion he believed was his birthright. He was a pawn, a useful idiot, blinded by ambition and a fragile ego. And then there was Frankie, her father's protégé, a man whose arrogance was only surpassed by his foolishness. He had served his purpose, a crucial cog in her intricate machinery, but his time was drawing to a close. The thought brought a faint, almost imperceptible smile to her lips. Her father, Matt Johnson, the legendary titan of Johnson and Goldburn law firm, had always preached about legacy. He had built an empire from nothing, a fortress of legal prowess and cutthroat ambition. But his legacy, in his eyes, was flawed. His wife, Becky's mother, had died a year prior, a quiet, almost unremarkable passing that Becky had ensured remained just that, unremarkable. Her mother's vast fortune, a staggering $5.5 billion, had quietly transferred to Becky, a detail Matt, in his grief and self-absorption, had overlooked. He saw only the firm, his creation, his enduring monument. He had no idea that his true legacy would be the ruin she would sow, using his own tools against him. Frankie, with his slicked back hair and predatory charm, had been an easy target. Becky had observed his weaknesses, his insatiable desire for power, his casual disregard for fidelity. It had been almost too simple to orchestrate the affair with her, to whisper sweet nothings of a shared future, a future where they would rule the firm together, sidelining Josh. The pregnancy, a carefully timed and executed deception, was the final, devastating blow. It was the spark that would ignite Josh's volatile temper, transforming him from a disgruntled husband into a murderous weapon. She remembered the meeting 2 weeks prior, the one her father had called to announce his retirement and the ensuing gladiatorial contest for his position. Matt, a man whose words were usually measured and precise, had been uncharacteristically harsh with Josh. "You're too damn arrogant and lazy," he thundered, his voice echoing through the hushed conference room. "You don't know how to run shit." The humiliation had been palpable, a raw wound in Josh's inflated pride. Becky had watched him, a predator observing its prey, noting the flicker of murderous intent in his eyes when Matt had praised Frankie, inadvertently sealing Frankie's fate. Josh's rage had been simmering for weeks, a slow-burning fuse. Becky had nearly fanned the flames, a subtle word here, a knowing glance there, a carefully placed piece of information about Frankie's supposed betrayal. The fabricated pregnancy, a masterstroke of psychological warfare, was the final push. She had known Josh would snap. It was only a matter of when and how spectacularly. The morning of the first kill. Becky descended to the kitchen, the scent of freshly brewed coffee a stark contrast to the metallic tang she imagined would soon fill the air. She poured herself a cup, her gaze drifting to the city below, a sprawling ant farm of oblivious lives. Josh would be leaving soon. She had ensured his morning was sufficiently volatile. The half-empty bottle of vodka, the lines of cocaine she'd meticulously laid out on his bedside table, the subtle taunts about Frankie's rising star, all designed to push him over the edge. He was a puppet, and she, the master puppeteer. At 8 a.m., her phone buzzed. A pre-arranged alert from a burner phone she'd given to a disgruntled junior associate, paid handsomely for a single, crucial text: "Frankie just arrived." Alone. Becky smiled. The stage was set. Josh's perspective. Josh Denning's head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against his skull. The taste of stale vodka and bile coated his tongue. He stumbled out of bed, his vision swimming, and his face connected with the gallon bottle of cheap vodka he'd been drowning himself in. A sharp crack, a searing pain, and he felt the jagged edge of his front tooth. "Fucking Frankie," he roared, the name a venomous hiss. His mind, a chaotic maelstrom of jealousy, rage, and fear, replayed Becky's tearful confession from last night. He got me pregnant, Josh. Frankie, he said he'd make sure you never got partner." The words had been a dagger, twisted deeper by the image of Frankie's smug face, always lurking, always undermining. He'd promised himself, vowed to the devil himself, that he would choke the life out of Frankie, make him pay for destroying his life, his career, his very future. He clawed at his jeans, pulling out a baggie of white powder. Cocaine. Becky had left it for him, a little pick-me-up, she'd said. He crushed the crystals, snorting line after line, the raw chemical burn a welcome distraction from the inferno in his gut. "Woo!" he shrieked, a primal scream that echoed through the penthouse, making the neighbors' dogs howl. "Shut up, you mutt. I'll kill you too." He made himself some eggs and bacon, the mundane act a bizarre counterpoint to the murder he was about to commit. He was going to work, to the law firm, to kill Frankie. Becky's perspective. The news reports started trickling in around 10:30 a.m. First, a vague mention of an incident at Johnson and Goulburn. Then, the sirens, a distant wail growing closer, piercing the morning calm. Becky turned on the news, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum. The local station cut to a live feed, flashing blue and red lights, police tape, a throng of reporters. A grim-faced detective, his voice strained, confirmed the worst. "We have a confirmed fatality. Frankie Goulburn, junior partner at the firm, has been found deceased." Becky allowed a single, perfectly timed tear to trace a path down her cheek. She knew the details before they were released. Josh, fueled by alcohol, cocaine, and a carefully constructed narrative of betrayal, had confronted Frankie in his office. The argument had escalated, turning into a brutal, visceral fight. Josh, a man whose rage often outstripped his intellect, had used a heavy bronze statue of Lady Justice, a gift from Matt to Frankie upon his promotion, to bludgeon Frankie to death. The reports would later describe the scene as horrific, unimaginable, a bloodbath. Frankie's face, his skull caved in, his body a mangled mess, was a testament to Josh's unbridled fury. The bronze scales of justice, now stained crimson, lay shattered beside him, a grotesque irony. Josh hadn't even tried to hide. He'd stood over Frankie's lifeless body, panting, covered in blood, until the first terrified assistant stumbled upon the scene and screamed. But by the time the police arrived, Josh was gone. He had slipped out a back exit, a route Becky had subtly suggested he familiarize himself with for late-night work sessions. He was on the run, just as she had planned. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Matt, her father, was devastated, his face a mask of shock and grief. His protégé, his chosen successor, brutally murdered. The firm, his legacy, now tainted by scandal. Becky played the grieving wife, the betrayed woman, her performance flawless. She wept, she wailed, she clung to her father, whispering assurances of justice. She even managed to shed a few tears for Frankie, the man whose demise she had so meticulously engineered. The police, overwhelmed by the high-profile nature of the case, were quick to identify Josh as the prime suspect. His history of volatile behavior, his public humiliation by Matt, and the fabricated pregnancy story she'd leaked to a few key gossips within the firm, all painted a clear picture for them. The escape and the hunt. Josh, a man of impulsive decisions, had vanished. Becky knew he wouldn't stay in the country. His mind, clouded by drugs and panic, would seek the furthest escape. Jamaica. It was their honeymoon destination, a place he'd often fantasized about returning to, a place where he believed he could disappear. She had even planted the idea in his head months ago, a casual suggestion during a drunken evening. "If things ever go south, babe, we could just run away to Jamaica. Start fresh." He'd laughed then, but the seed had been sown. Her next move was crucial. She needed to appear distraught, desperate, a victim of her husband's madness. She waited a week, allowing the initial shock to subside, allowing Josh to establish his escape route. Then, with a heavy sigh and a carefully rehearsed tremor in her voice, she called a private investigator. "My husband, Josh Denning. He's gone. He took everything, all our money, and he left with my best friend, Sarah." Sarah, poor, naive Sarah, her childhood friend, her confidant, her unwitting accomplice. Sarah had always been a little too enamored with Josh, a little too eager to please Becky. It had been simple to convince Sarah that Josh was secretly in love with her, that he was planning to leave Becky for her, and that they should run away together. Becky had even provided Sarah with a substantial sum of money, ostensibly from Josh's secret stash, to facilitate their escape. Sarah, blinded by the fantasy of a passionate elopement, had eagerly agreed. The thought of Sarah's eventual fate, a mere casualty in Becky's grand design, brought another flicker of amusement. She was just another piece on the board, easily sacrificed. The private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Miller, listened intently, his eyes sharp and assessing. Becky painted a picture of a heartbroken wife, betrayed by both her husband and her best friend, left penniless and pregnant. The pregnancy, of course, was still a lie, a powerful emotional lever. She provided Miller with carefully curated information. Josh's favorite haunts, his travel habits, even a few fake emails between Josh and Sarah, detailing their supposed plans for a new life in Jamaica. She made sure to emphasize the financial aspect. "He cleaned out our joint accounts, Mr. Miller. Every last penny. I have nothing left." The lie was potent, designed to ignite Miller's sense of justice and his mercenary instincts. He took the case, his fee exorbitant, but a mere pittance compared to what Becky stood to gain. Miller's investigation was thorough, but ultimately guided by Becky's subtle manipulations. He tracked Josh and Sarah to a secluded villa in Negril, Jamaica. The reports he sent back were detailed, filled with photographs of Josh, looking tanned and relaxed, Sarah by his side, their faces alight with a fleeting, stolen happiness. Becky studied the images, a cold satisfaction settling in her chest. They were exactly where she wanted them. Josh, believing he had escaped, was now a caged animal, waiting for the next phase of her plan to unfold. The second domino, Matt's demise. Back in New York, the law firm was in turmoil. Frankie's death had left a gaping void, and Matt, still reeling from the loss, was struggling to maintain control. The competition for partner, once a fierce battle, had become a morbid shadow play. Josh was a fugitive, Frankie was dead, and the remaining associates were either too terrified or too incompetent to step up. Matt, in his grief and desperation, made a fatal error. He announced that he would posthumously award Frankie the senior partnership, a symbolic gesture that would infuriate Josh, wherever he was hiding. Becky had anticipated this. She had known her father's sentimental nature, his desire to honor his fallen protégé. It was the perfect trigger for Josh's next act of violence. She ensured the news reached Josh through a carefully crafted anonymous email, sent to an address she knew he still monitored. The email, disguised as a concerned message from a former colleague, detailed Matt's decision, painting it as a final insult, a posthumous triumph for Frankie over Josh. It also subtly hinted at Matt's continued disparagement of Josh, reminding him of the public humiliation he had endured. Josh's response was swift and predictable. The news of Frankie's posthumous promotion, coupled with the lingering resentment from Matt's earlier public dressing down, ignited a fresh wave of murderous fury. He saw it as a final, unforgivable betrayal, a declaration that even in death, Frankie was superior. His escape to Jamaica, meant to be a fresh start, now felt like a hollow victory, tainted by Matt's perceived injustice. He would not let Matt get away with it. He would return, and he would make Matt pay. Becky received another anonymous tip, this time from a contact within the Jamaican police force she had cultivated years ago, a man with a penchant for bribes and a blind eye for certain activities. Josh had been seen making arrangements for a clandestine return to the U.S. He was coming back for Matt. Perfect. She prepared for her father's death with the same meticulous planning she had applied to Frankie's. Matt, a creature of habit, always worked late on Fridays, alone in his sprawling office on the top floor of the firm. He would be vulnerable, unsuspecting. Becky made sure the security cameras on his floor were malfunctioning. That night, a subtle hack she'd learned from a former boyfriend, a brilliant but morally bankrupt tech wizard. She also ensured that the cleaning crew, usually present, was given the night off due to a sudden emergency. The stage was set once more. Josh arrived in New York under the cover of darkness, a ghost haunting his former life. He bypassed the firm's security with ease, his intimate knowledge of the building's layout a lethal advantage. He found Matt in his office, hunched over legal documents, a half-empty glass of scotch by his side. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and impending doom. "You shouldn't have done it, Matt." Josh's voice was a low growl, raw with suppressed fury. Matt looked up, his eyes widening in shock, then fear. "Josh, what are you doing here? You're a fugitive. You gave him partner, didn't you? Even after he ruined everything." Josh advanced, his hands clenching into fists. "You always favored him, always." Matt tried to reason, to explain, but Josh was beyond reason. The cocaine, the alcohol, the weeks of simmering resentment, all exploded in a violent frenzy. Josh lunged, tackling Matt to the ground. The fight was brutal, desperate. Matt, an older man, was no match for Josh's drug-fueled strength. Josh's hands found Matt's throat, squeezing, cutting off his air. Matt's eyes bulged, his face turning a ghastly shade of purple. He clawed at Josh's arms, his struggles growing weaker, until finally, with a choked gasp, he went limp. But Josh wasn't finished. The rage, the humiliation, the years of feeling inadequate in Matt's shadow, demanded more. He grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from Matt's desk, a gift from Becky, ironically, and brought it down repeatedly on Matt's head, each blow a sickening thud. Blood splattered across the mahogany desk, the pristine legal documents, the framed photographs of Becky and her mother. It was a gruesome, visceral act of vengeance, a final, bloody exclamation mark on a life consumed by bitterness. Becky received the news of her father's death with a feigned gasp of horror. The police, already on high alert for Josh, quickly connected the dots. Another murder, another victim, another brutal display of violence, all pointing to the same perpetrator. Josh Denning, the deranged husband, the double murderer. The narrative was perfect, airtight. She wept for her father, her tears genuine this time, but not for grief. For triumph. 2 birds, 1 stone. Frankie, the rival, and Matt, the obstacle, both removed. And Josh, the instrument of their demise, now a hunted animal, his fate sealed. The incestuous secret and Becky's rage. But there was a detail, a dark, festering secret that Josh had discovered, a secret that would ignite a new, far more dangerous kind of rage in Becky. A secret that would transform her from a calculating manipulator into a vengeful goddess of retribution. The incest. Matt and Becky. It was a truth so vile, so twisted, that it had been buried deep, a scar on Becky's soul that she had meticulously hidden from the world. Only a select few knew, and those who did, were either dead or silenced. Josh, in his frantic search for anything that could incriminate Matt, anything that could justify his own actions, had stumbled upon a hidden diary in Matt's office, tucked away in a false bottom drawer. It was her mother's diary, filled with years of agonizing entries detailing Matt's depravity, his control, and the unspeakable acts he had forced upon Becky from a young age. The diary was a testament to a life of silent suffering, a chilling chronicle of a father's monstrous abuse and a daughter's forced complicity. It also contained veiled references to her mother's own quiet rebellion, her attempts to escape, and the subtle, insidious ways Becky had ensured those attempts failed. Her mother's death, a year prior, had been no accident. It had been a meticulously planned overdose, disguised as a tragic mistake, orchestrated by Becky to inherit her vast fortune and silence the only living witness to her father's crimes and her own dark secrets. Josh, reading the entries, had felt a cold dread, then a perverse sense of understanding. This wasn't just about a promotion. This was about something far more sinister, a rot at the heart of the Johnson family. He had confronted Matt, not just about the partnership, but about the diary, about the incest. And in that moment, the rage that had consumed him, the rage that had led him to kill Frankie, had found a new, horrifying target. He had killed Matt not just for the promotion, but for the unspeakable acts, for the violation of Becky, for the twisted legacy he had left behind. He believed he was, in some warped way, avenging Becky. Becky learned of the diary's discovery, and Josh's subsequent confrontation with Matt, through a series of intercepted communications. Her carefully constructed facade shattered. Not because of Matt's death, that was part of the plan. But because Josh had dared to unearth her deepest, most shameful secret. He had seen the monster that had been created, the monster that she had become. And he had presumed to act as her avenger. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He had touched the untouchable, revealed the unrevealable. And for that, he would pay a price far greater than death. Her rage was a cold, burning inferno. It was not the impulsive, explosive fury of Josh, but a calculated, precise wrath. He had thought he was getting away clean, out of Dodge, believing he had outsmarted everyone, including the police. He was wrong. Becky would ensure he understood the true meaning of retribution. She would strip him of everything, piece by agonizing piece, before finally extinguishing his pathetic life. He had dared to expose her, to think he understood her pain, to believe he had a right to her secrets. He had become a liability, a loose end that needed to be severed with extreme prejudice. The trap, Jamaica and the best friend. Becky intensified Miller's investigation, feeding him more fabricated evidence, more tantalizing clues about Josh's extravagant spending in Jamaica. She wanted Josh to feel secure, to believe he was truly free, before she tightened the noose. She knew he was living large, spending the money he'd supposedly stolen from her, money she had, in fact, subtly funneled into their joint accounts over the years, knowing he would eventually take it. It was all part of the illusion. She also began to subtly poison Sarah's mind. Through anonymous messages, disguised as concerned friends, she hinted at Josh's true nature, his violence, his instability. She planted seeds of doubt about his love for Sarah, suggesting he was merely using her as a shield, a temporary distraction. Sarah, already insecure and far from home, began to crack. The idyllic Jamaican escape slowly transformed into a gilded cage, filled with paranoia and suspicion. Becky's plan for Josh and Sarah was simple, elegant, and utterly ruthless. She would use the very thing Josh thought he had gained, freedom and a new life with Sarah, to destroy him. She would make him suffer, not just physically, but psychologically. She would make him watch as everything he held dear, everything he thought he had built, crumbled to dust. 6 months had passed since Frankie's murder. 6 months of meticulous planning, of subtle manipulations, of watching her pawns dance to her tune. The timeline was perfect. The infant boy, Frankie's son, was now 3 months old, a tiny, innocent life caught in the crosscurrents of her dark ambition. And Becky, 5 months pregnant with Frankie's child, felt a perverse sense of satisfaction. A new life, born from death and deception, a testament to her ultimate control. She booked a flight to Jamaica. Not under her own name, of course. A discreet, untraceable journey. She would confront Josh and Sarah herself. The private investigator, Miller, had served his purpose. He had led her directly to her prey. Now, it was time for the huntress to claim her prize. Part 2. The Serpent in Paradise. Jamaica. The very name conjured images of sun-drenched beaches, turquoise waters, and carefree days. For Josh and Sarah, it had been a fleeting illusion of paradise, a temporary reprieve from the storm they had left behind. For Becky, it was the perfect stage for her final act of vengeance. She arrived under a shroud of anonymity, her features subtly altered, her demeanor radiating an air of quiet efficiency that belied the storm within. The tropical humidity clung to her like a second skin, a constant reminder of the oppressive heat of her own simmering rage. She found their villa easily, a secluded haven nestled amidst lush foliage, overlooking the sparkling Caribbean Sea. It was a place designed for lovers, for escape, for forgetting. How ironic. She watched them from a distance, a silent observer, her eyes cold and calculating. Josh, shirtless and tanned, laughed as he splashed Sarah in the infinity pool. Sarah, her hair streaked with sun, giggled, her face alight with a happiness that made Becky's stomach churn. They looked like a postcard, a perfect picture of stolen bliss. A picture she was about to shatter. Her plan was simple, yet devastatingly effective. She would not confront them directly, not yet. She would unravel their fragile paradise from within, sowing seeds of doubt and paranoia until their stolen happiness curdled into fear. She began with Sarah. A series of anonymous notes, delivered by a local boy she'd bribed, began to appear in Sarah's belongings. Each note was a carefully crafted whisper of suspicion, hinting at Josh's true intentions, his violent past, his manipulative nature. He used you to escape. He'll leave you when he's bored. He killed Frankie. He killed Matt. What makes you think you're safe? Sarah, already on edge from the constant threat of discovery, began to fray. Her laughter became forced, her eyes darting nervously. She started questioning Josh, her voice laced with a growing fear. Josh, high on his perceived freedom and the endless supply of cocaine Becky had ensured found its way to him, dismissed her fears as paranoia, a woman's irrationality. He grew increasingly irritable, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. The cracks in their facade began to show, widening with each passing day. Becky watched, a silent conductor of their discord. She observed their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. She noted Josh's increasing reliance on alcohol and drugs, his descent into a self-destructive spiral. She saw Sarah's growing desperation, her realization that her dream of a new life was rapidly turning into a nightmare. The time was ripe. The poisoned paradise. Becky made her move on a sweltering afternoon. Josh was passed out by the pool, a half-empty bottle of rum clutched in his hand. Sarah was inside, her face pale and drawn, staring blankly at the ocean. Becky slipped into the villa, a phantom in the shadows. She moved with a practiced ease, her years of meticulous planning culminating in this moment. She found Sarah in the living room, her shoulders slumped, tears silently streaming down her face. Sarah, Becky's voice was soft, laced with a faint concern. Sarah gasped, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with shock. Becky, what are you doing here? I came for you, Sarah. I came to save you from him. Becky's eyes were pools of false sympathy. She sat beside Sarah, taking her hand, her touch surprisingly gentle. He's a monster, Sarah. He killed Frankie. He killed my father. He'll kill you too. Sarah, vulnerable and terrified, clung to Becky's words, desperate for a lifeline. Becky spun a tale of Josh's escalating violence, his dark secrets, his manipulative charm. She painted herself as the victim, the grieving wife, the betrayed friend, who had finally seen the truth and had come to rescue Sarah from the clutches of a madman. She even confessed, with a perfectly timed sob, about the incest, twisting it to make Josh the villain, the one who had discovered the secret and used it to further his own twisted agenda. He killed my father because he found out about the unspeakable things my father did to me. And he thought he was avenging me. But he just wanted to destroy everything. Sarah, horrified and repulsed, believed every word. She saw Josh not as a lover, but as a dangerous, unpredictable killer. Becky then offered a solution, a way out. We can escape, Sarah. Together, we can make him pay for what he's done. Becky had brought with her a small, innocuous-looking vial. A colorless, odorless liquid, derived from a rare tropical plant, capable of inducing a rapid, agonizing death that mimicked a heart attack. She had spent months researching, perfecting the dosage, ensuring its untraceable nature. She poured a generous amount into Josh's half-empty rum bottle, then added a smaller, more diluted dose to a glass of water she offered to Sarah. Drink this, Sarah, it will calm your nerves. We need to be clear-headed. Sarah, trusting Becky implicitly, drank the water. Within minutes, a searing pain ripped through her stomach. Her eyes widened in terror, her hands clutching at her throat. Becky, what have you done? She choked, her voice a desperate whisper. Becky watched, her face impassive, as Sarah convulsed, her body racked with agony. Blood trickled from her mouth, her eyes rolled back, and with a final, shuddering gasp, she collapsed, lifeless. Her best friend, a casualty of her own naivete, a pawn sacrificed without a second thought. Becky then turned her attention to Josh. He stirred, groaning, as she splashed a small amount of water on his face. His eyes fluttered open, bleary and confused. Becky, what the hell? Hello, Josh, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Did you enjoy your little vacation? Josh tried to sit up, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish. He saw Sarah's lifeless body, then the empty rum bottle beside him. A cold dread seeped into his drug-addled mind. What did you do? I merely helped you achieve your ultimate freedom, Josh. The freedom from all your earthly concerns. She watched as the poison began its work. Josh's face contorted in pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He clutched at his chest, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He tried to speak, to scream, but only a gurgling sound escaped his lips. His body spasmed violently, his muscles contracting and relaxing in a grotesque dance of death. Blood began to seep from his nose and ears, a dark crimson against his tanned skin. He thrashed, his body arching, his hands clawing at the air, until finally, with a final, guttural scream that was abruptly cut short, he went still. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared up at the clear blue sky, a silent testament to his agonizing demise. Becky stood over his body, a faint smile playing on her lips. The villa, once a symbol of stolen paradise, was now a tomb. 2 more deaths, clean and untraceable. The local authorities, easily bribed and eager to avoid a scandal involving wealthy foreigners, would rule it a tragic accident, a drug overdose, a lover's pact gone wrong. The bodies would be cremated, their secrets buried with them. No loose ends. Just as she liked it. The spoils of war. With Josh and Sarah eliminated, Becky moved swiftly to consolidate her gains. She had already meticulously planned this phase, setting up offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a network of discreet contacts. She accessed Josh's accounts, draining them of every last penny, a poetic justice for his supposed theft. She took over Frankie's accounts, his assets, and, through a series of legal maneuvers she had orchestrated months in advance, she seized control of Johnson & Goldburn law firm. The firm, her father's legacy, was now hers, a glittering jewel in her crown of calculated conquest. Her father's estate, a vast fortune in its own right, was also hers. With her mother's death a year prior, and Matt's subsequent demise, Becky was the sole heir. The $5.5 billion from her mother, combined with Matt's considerable wealth, made her one of the richest women in the world. She had everything: power, wealth, and absolute control. And she had achieved it all through a meticulously orchestrated symphony of murder and manipulation. She returned to New York, a triumphant queen returning to her kingdom. The media, initially consumed by the sensational murders, now painted her as a tragic figure, a strong woman who had overcome unimaginable loss. The grieving widow, the orphaned daughter, the pregnant survivor. She played the role to perfection, her public appearances carefully choreographed, her interviews filled with poignant reflections and brave pronouncements about rebuilding her life and honoring her family's legacy. The public adored her, showering her with sympathy and admiration. But beneath the veneer of grief and resilience, Becky was thriving. She transformed Johnson & Goldburn, rebranding it as Johnson & Denning, a subtle nod to her vanquished husband, a constant reminder of her victory. She expanded its reach, acquiring smaller firms, diversifying its portfolio. She became a force to be reckoned with, a legal titan in her own right, her reputation built on the ashes of her victims. The unseen hand. Other casualties. Frankie, Matt, Josh, Sarah. 4 lives extinguished, each a crucial step in Becky's ascent. But there were other casualties, smaller, less significant lives that had been swept away in the wake of her ambition. The disgruntled junior associate who had provided the initial tip about Frankie's arrival, later found dead in a suspicious car accident. The local Jamaican official who had accepted her bribe, his body discovered floating in the harbor, a victim of a supposed drug deal gone wrong. The tech wizard who had taught her about camera hacks, his code mysteriously corrupted, his career ruined. Each death, a carefully placed piece in her intricate puzzle, ensuring no witnesses, no loose ends, no one to connect the dots. Becky had learned early on that true power lay not in brute force, but in subtle manipulation, in understanding the weaknesses of others and exploiting them with ruthless precision. She had mastered the art of the unseen hand, the whispered suggestion, the carefully planted seed of doubt. She had orchestrated every event, every death, every twist and turn in the narrative, all from the shadows, her motives hidden behind a veil of grief and innocence. Now, 6 months after the first domino fell, she sat in her father's former office, the panoramic view of Manhattan spread out before her. The city, once a canvas for her destruction, was now her playground. She was 5 months pregnant, a daughter growing within her, a tangible link to Frankie, the man whose death had set her plan in motion. And in the nursery, a little boy, Frankie's son, slept soundly, unaware of the bloody legacy that had brought him into her care. She would raise him as her own, a constant reminder of her triumph, a living trophy of her cunning. She leaned back in her plush leather chair, a glass of expensive champagne in her hand. The bubbles tickled her nose, a fleeting sensation of joy. She had done it. She had pulled it off. Every single detail, every single murder, every single manipulation. Flawlessly, she let out a soft, almost inaudible laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief and triumph. The sheer audacity of it all. The perfect execution. She, Becky Denning, had orchestrated a symphony of death and deception, and she had gotten away with it. The world saw a grieving widow, a successful businesswoman, a loving mother. They saw what she wanted them to see. The truth, the dark, horrifying truth, was hers alone. The unseen lover. The chime of her private elevator broke the silence. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that rarely graced her lips. He was here, her estranged lover, the one person who knew the true depths of her ambition, the true darkness of her soul. He was an agent, a man of shadows and secrets, a master of information and influence. He had been her silent partner, her confidant, her co-conspirator in the grand design. He had provided the untraceable poisons, the burner phones, the anonymous tips, the subtle manipulations of official channels. He was the unseen hand behind her unseen hand. He stepped out of the elevator, a tall, lean figure, his eyes dark and intense. He was a man who moved with a predatory grace, his presence filling the room with an unspoken power. He was the only one who truly understood her, the only one who saw beyond the facade, who reveled in her ruthlessness. He was her equal, her dark mirror. "Becky," he said, his voice a low rumble, a caress in the quiet room. He walked towards her, his gaze never leaving hers. He took the champagne glass from her hand, setting it aside, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. His lips found hers, a kiss that was both tender and possessive, a silent acknowledgement of their shared darkness. "It's done, isn't it?" he whispered against her lips, his breath warm against her skin. "Everything you wanted." She pulled back slightly, her eyes sparkling with a triumphant gleam. "Everything and more, my love. They never saw it coming. Not a single one of them." He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers down her spine. "And why, my dear Becky? Why all this? The firm, the money, the deaths. What was the true motivation behind your masterpiece of manipulation?" Becky looked out at the city, the endless expanse of lights and shadows. Her smile widened, a chilling, predatory grin. "Because, my love," she said, her voice a soft, deadly purr, "I wanted to prove that I could. I wanted to prove that I was smarter, more ruthless, more powerful than any of them. And because I wanted to create a world where I was the only one in control. A world where no one could ever hurt me again. A world where I was truly free." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the opulent office, the symbols of her hard-won empire. "And besides," she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "it was so much fun." He laughed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration. He knew her better than anyone. He knew the depths of her ambition, the cold fire that burned within her. He was her partner in crime, her soulmate in darkness. Together, They were an unstoppable force, a testament to the power of a twisted mind and an unyielding will. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the serpent that now reigned supreme, its coils wrapped tightly around its unsuspecting prey. Becky, the architect of chaos, the queen of deception, had won. And as she raised her glass to the silent city, she knew, with absolute certainty, that her reign had only just begun. The incestuous secret, a deeper abyss. Becky's rage, a cold, calculated inferno, had been ignited not by Josh's actions against Frankie or Matt, but by his audacious discovery of her deepest, most guarded secret, the incestuous relationship with her father, Matt. This was a truth so vile, so profoundly twisted, that it had been buried beneath layers of denial, manipulation, and a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. Only a select few had ever glimpsed the edges of this abyss, and Becky had ensured their silence permanently. Josh, in his desperate, drug-fueled quest for anything that could justify his own escalating violence, anything that could paint Matt as the true villain, had stumbled upon a hidden compartment in Matt's antique mahogany desk. It wasn't a false bottom, but a spring-loaded panel, concealed behind a meticulously carved lion's head. Inside, nestled amongst dusty legal papers and forgotten trinkets, was a small, leather-bound diary. It belonged to her mother, Eleanor Johnson, a woman whose existence had been as ethereal and fragile as a wisp of smoke, a woman Becky had quietly despised for her weakness, her silent suffering. Eleanor's elegant script filled the pages, a chilling chronicle of a life consumed by a monstrous secret. The early entries spoke of a vibrant, hopeful young woman, deeply in love with the ambitious, charismatic Matt. But as the years progressed, the tone shifted, darkening with each stroke of the pen. There were veiled references, then increasingly explicit details, of Matt's insidious control, his psychological torment, and the unspeakable acts he had forced upon Becky from a tender age. Eleanor's words painted a harrowing picture of a father who saw his daughter not as a child to be cherished, but as an extension of his own twisted desires, a possession to be exploited. The diary detailed Becky's forced complicity, her childhood innocence systematically eroded, replaced by a chilling pragmatism born of survival. It spoke of the fear, the shame, the profound sense of betrayal that had festered within Becky, transforming her into the cold, calculating woman she had become. But the diary also contained Eleanor's own quiet rebellion, her desperate attempts to escape the gilded cage of her marriage. There were entries about secret meetings with lawyers, plans for divorce, even a fleeting affair with a kind, gentle artist. Each attempt, however, had been meticulously sabotaged. Not by Matt, not directly, but by Becky. Eleanor's diary, in its raw honesty, inadvertently revealed Becky's own dark secrets, her calculated interventions, her subtle manipulations that ensured her mother's escape attempts failed. Becky had seen her mother's weakness, her inability to fight back, as a profound betrayal, a failure to protect them both. And so, Becky had taken matters into her own hands, ensuring her mother remained trapped, a living testament to Matt's power, and a silent witness to Becky's own burgeoning ruthlessness. Eleanor's death, a year prior, had been no accident. The diary confirmed it. It was a meticulously planned overdose, disguised as a tragic mistake, a consequence of her long-standing depression. Becky had orchestrated it, not out of malice, but out of a cold, pragmatic necessity. Eleanor's vast fortune, a staggering $5.5 billion inherited from her own industrialist family, was a prize Becky coveted. But more importantly, Eleanor was the only living witness to Matt's crimes and, more damningly, to Becky's own complicity in the depths of her depravity. Her death had been a clean, efficient solution, silencing the past and paving the way for Becky's future. Josh, reading the diary, had felt a cold dread seep into his bones, followed by a perverse sense of understanding. This wasn't just about a promotion, about a law firm. This was about something far more sinister, a rot at the very core of the Johnson family. He had confronted Matt, not just about the posthumous partnership for Frankie, but about the diary, about the incest. He had believed, in his drug-addled, self-righteous delusion, that he was avenging Becky, that he was righting a profound wrong. He had killed Matt not just for the perceived professional slight, but for the unspeakable acts, for the violation of Becky, for the twisted legacy he had left behind. He had seen himself as a dark knight, a liberator. Becky, through her network of informants and carefully placed surveillance, had learned of the diary's discovery and Josh's subsequent confrontation with Matt. Her carefully constructed facade, the one she presented to the world, had not shattered. Instead, a deeper, more primal layer of her being had been exposed, a raw nerve touched. Not because of Matt's death, that was part of the plan, a necessary step. But because Josh had dared to unearth her deepest, most shameful secret. He had seen the monster that had been created, the monster that she had become. And he had presumed to act as her avenger, to understand her pain, to believe he had a right to her secrets. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He had touched the untouchable, revealed the unrevealable. And for that, he would pay a price far greater than death. Her rage was not the impulsive, explosive fury of Josh, but a cold, burning inferno, a calculated, precise wrath that would consume him entirely. He had thought he was getting away clean, out of Dodge, believing he had outsmarted everyone, including the police. He was wrong. Becky would ensure he understood the true meaning of retribution. She would strip him of everything, piece by agonizing piece, before finally extinguishing his pathetic life. He had dared to expose her, to think he understood her pain, to believe he had a right to her secrets. He had become a liability, a loose end that needed to be severed with extreme prejudice. The psychological torture, unraveling Josh. Becky's arrival in Jamaica was not merely to eliminate Josh and Sarah, but to orchestrate a psychological torment that would strip Josh of his sanity before his life. She wanted him to understand, in his final moments, the true extent of her power, the depth of her cunning. She wanted him to realize that he had been nothing more than a puppet, dancing on her strings. After Sarah's agonizing death, a spectacle Becky had ensured Josh witnessed in his drug-induced haze, the real torture began. Becky didn't immediately administer the fatal dose to Josh. Instead, she kept him alive, barely conscious, his body racked with the initial stages of the slow-acting poison, a variant she had developed specifically for this purpose. It was designed to induce extreme pain, hallucinations, and a terrifying clarity of mind, allowing the victim to fully comprehend their impending doom. She dragged Josh's convulsing body to a secluded, soundproofed room within the villa, a room she had discreetly rented and prepared weeks in advance. It was stark, cold, and illuminated by a single, flickering bulb. Here, she began her monologue, a chilling recitation of her grand design, her voice a soft, melodic whisper that cut through his pain-filled groans. "You thought you were so clever, didn't you, Josh?" she began, her eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. "You thought you had escaped. You thought you had avenged me. But you were just a tool, a blunt instrument in my hands." She recounted every detail, every manipulation, every carefully placed lie. She described how she had orchestrated the affair with Frankie, how she had fabricated the pregnancy, how she had fanned the flames of his jealousy and rage. She detailed how she had ensured the news of Matt's posthumous promotion reached him, knowing it would draw him back to New York, knowing he would kill her father. She described how she had set up Sarah, feeding her lies, providing her with the money, sending her to him, knowing Sarah would be another casualty, another loose end. Then came the revelation of the diary. "You thought you discovered my secret, didn't you? You thought you understood my pain. You thought you were my savior." She laughed, a chilling, mirthless sound. "You found a piece of a puzzle, Josh. A piece I allowed you to find. My mother's diary, a testament to her weakness, her pathetic attempts to escape, and my own efficiency in ensuring those attempts failed." Josh, his body writhing in agony, his mind struggling to process the horrifying truth, tried to scream, but only a choked gurgle escaped his lips. His eyes, bloodshot and wide with terror, pleaded for mercy, for an end to the torment. But Becky was relentless. "You see, Josh, my mother's death was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated exit. She had billions, you know, billions that are now mine. And she was a witness. A weak, pathetic witness to my father's proclivities, and my own, Evolution. She leaned closer, her breath a cold whisper against his ear. You thought you avenged me by killing Matt. You merely removed an obstacle. An obstacle I was already planning to remove. You just saved me the trouble. She then described, in graphic detail, the various ways she had ensured the deaths of the other casualties. The junior associate, the Jamaican official, the tech wizard. Each death, a carefully placed piece in her intricate puzzle, ensuring no witnesses, no loose ends, no one to connect the dots back to her. She reveled in his horror, in the dawning realization that he had been nothing more than a pawn in her elaborate game. And now, Josh, she concluded, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper, you will join them. But unlike them, you will understand why. You will understand that you were never in control. You were merely a puppet, and I, your master. With a final, deliberate movement, she administered the full, lethal dose of the poison. Josh's body convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back in his head. A torrent of blood erupted from his mouth, staining the pristine white floor. His limbs thrashed, his muscles spasmed, his life force draining away in a grotesque, agonizing dance. Becky watched, her gaze unwavering, until the last tremor subsided, and Josh Denning lay still, his face a mask of terror and agony, his eyes wide and unseeing, reflecting the flickering bulb above. He had died knowing the truth, and that, for Becky, was the ultimate victory. The unseen hand, other casualties and loose ends. Becky's meticulous planning extended far beyond the immediate circle of Frankie, Matt, Josh, and Sarah. She understood that a grand design required the elimination of all potential threats, all loose ends, no matter how seemingly insignificant. Her network of informants, cultivated over years, proved invaluable in this regard. There was David Chen, the disgruntled junior associate at Johnson & Goldburn. David, a man perpetually overlooked and underappreciated, had been an easy mark. Becky had approached him months before Frankie's murder, feigning sympathy for his plight, offering him a substantial sum of money for insider information about the firm's internal politics. She had subtly guided him to observe Frankie's movements, to report on his arrival times, his meetings, his habits. It was David who had sent the crucial text message confirming Frankie's solitary arrival on the day of his murder. Later, when the police began their initial investigation, David, emboldened by Becky's false assurances and a further payment, had provided a carefully crafted statement, subtly implicating Josh and diverting attention from any other potential suspects. However, David had also seen too much, heard too much. He knew about Becky's unusual interest in Frankie's schedule, her subtle questions about Josh's temper. He was a potential witness, a loose thread. 2 weeks after Matt's death, David was found dead in a fiery car crash on a deserted stretch of highway. The official report cited reckless driving and alcohol. Becky had ensured his car's brakes were tampered with, a small, untraceable adjustment made by a mechanic she had blackmailed years ago over a gambling debt. His death was horrific, his body charred beyond recognition, a grim warning to anyone who might consider speaking out. Then there was Inspector Dubois, the corrupt Jamaican police official. Dubois, a man with a penchant for bribes and a blind eye for certain activities, had been instrumental in facilitating Josh's escape and later, in ensuring the official narrative of Josh and Sarah's deaths remained unchallenged. Becky had cultivated him years ago during a vacation to the island, subtly gathering intelligence on his illicit activities. When the time came, she had offered him an irresistible sum of money to turn a blind eye to Josh's clandestine arrival and departure, and later, to swiftly close the investigation into the Villa deaths, ruling them a tragic drug overdose. Dubois, greedy and complacent, had accepted without question. But Dubois, too, knew too much. He had seen Becky in Jamaica, had facilitated her movements, had been privy to her unusual interest in Josh's whereabouts. He was a liability. A month after Becky's return to New York, Dubois' body was discovered floating in the Kingston harbor, his throat slit, a victim of a supposed drug deal gone wrong. The local underworld, easily manipulated by Becky's anonymous tips and carefully planted evidence, was quick to claim responsibility. His death was brutal, his body bloated and disfigured by the sea, a chilling testament to the consequences of crossing Becky. And finally, Ethan Vance, the brilliant but morally bankrupt tech wizard. Ethan had been a former boyfriend, a man who had taught Becky the intricacies of digital manipulation, the art of hacking security systems, and the subtle ways to leave no digital trace. He had been instrumental in malfunctioning the security cameras on Matt's floor, and in providing Becky with the tools to create untraceable communications. Ethan, however, had a fatal flaw, an insatiable ego and a tendency to boast about his exploits. He had, in a moment of drunken bravado, hinted to a mutual acquaintance about a big job he had done for a very powerful woman. Becky, ever vigilant, had caught wind of his indiscretion. Ethan was too dangerous to leave alive. His code, his life's work, was mysteriously corrupted, his servers wiped clean, his digital identity erased. He was professionally ruined, his reputation in tatters. Driven to despair, he had taken his own life, a note found beside him blaming an anonymous, digital phantom, for his downfall. His death was a quiet, desperate act, a final surrender to an unseen enemy. These were the silent casualties, the forgotten names in the wake of Becky's grand design. Each one, a necessary sacrifice, a meticulously removed obstacle, ensuring the flawless execution of her plan. She had learned early on that true power lay not in brute force, but in subtle manipulation, in understanding the weaknesses of others and exploiting them with ruthless precision. She had mastered the art of the unseen hand, the whispered suggestion, the carefully planted seed of doubt. She had orchestrated every event, every death, every twist and turn in the narrative, all from the shadows, her motives hidden behind a veil of grief and innocence. The Serpent's Triumph, a new world order. Now, 6 months after the first domino fell, Becky sat in her father's former office, the panoramic view of Manhattan spread out before her. The city, once a canvas for her destruction, was now her playground. The Johnson & Goldburn law firm, now rebranded as Johnson & Denning, was thriving under her ruthless leadership. She had expanded its reach, acquiring smaller firms, diversifying its portfolio, transforming it into a legal empire that dwarfed its former glory. She was a force to be reckoned with, a legal titan in her own right, her reputation built on the ashes of her victims. She was 5 months pregnant, a daughter growing within her, a tangible link to Frankie, the man whose death had set her plan in motion. The child, a symbol of her ultimate control, would be raised in a world she had meticulously crafted, a world where she was the undisputed queen. And in the nursery, a little boy, Frankie's son, slept soundly, unaware of the bloody legacy that had brought him into her care. She would raise him as her own, a constant reminder of her triumph, a living trophy of her cunning. He was a blank slate, a vessel for her to mold, a future pawn in her continuing game. She leaned back in her plush leather chair, a glass of expensive champagne in her hand. The bubbles tickled her nose, a fleeting sensation of joy. She had done it. She had pulled it off. Every single detail, every single murder, every single manipulation. Flawlessly. She let out a soft, almost inaudible laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief and triumph. The sheer audacity of it all. The perfect execution. She, Becky Denning, had orchestrated a symphony of death and deception, and she had gotten away with it. The world saw a grieving widow, a successful businesswoman, a loving mother. They saw what she wanted them to see. The truth, the dark, horrifying truth, was hers alone. The unseen lover, the architect of her soul. The chime of her private elevator broke the silence. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that rarely graced her lips. He was here, her estranged lover, the one person who knew the true depths of her ambition, the true darkness of her soul. He was an agent, a man of shadows and secrets, a master of information and influence. He had been her silent partner, her confidant, her co-conspirator in the grand design. He had provided the untraceable poisons, the burner phones, the anonymous tips, the subtle manipulations of official channels. He was the unseen hand behind her unseen hand. He stepped out of the elevator, a tall, lean figure, his eyes dark and intense. He was a man who moved with a predatory grace, his presence filling the room with an unspoken power. He was the only one who truly understood her, the only one who saw beyond the facade, who reveled in her ruthlessness. He was her equal, her dark mirror. "Becky," he said, his voice a low rumble, a caress in the quiet room. He walked towards her, his gaze never leaving hers. He took the champagne glass from her hand, setting it aside, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. His lips found hers, a kiss that was both tender and possessive, a silent acknowledgement of their shared darkness. "It's done, isn't it?" he whispered against her lips, his breath warm against her skin. "Everything you wanted." She pulled back slightly, her eyes sparkling with a triumphant gleam. "Everything and more, my love." They never saw it coming. Not a single one of them. He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers down her spine. "And why, my dear Becky? Why all this? The firm, the money, the deaths. What was the true motivation behind your masterpiece of manipulation?" Becky looked out at the city, the endless expanse of lights and shadows. Her smile widened, a chilling, predatory grin. "Because, my love," she said, her voice a soft, deadly purr, "I wanted to prove that I could. I wanted to prove that I was smarter, more ruthless, more powerful than any of them. And because I wanted to create a world where I was the only one in control. A world where no one could ever hurt me again. A world where I was truly free. A world where the past, and its ugly truths, could never touch me again." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the opulent office, the symbols of her hard-won empire. "And besides," she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "it was so much fun. The ultimate game, and I won." He laughed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration. He knew her better than anyone. He knew the depths of her ambition, the cold fire that burned within her. He was her partner in crime, her soulmate in darkness. Together, they were an unstoppable force, a testament to the power of a twisted mind and an unyielding will. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the serpent that now reigned supreme, its coils wrapped tightly around its unsuspecting prey. Becky, the architect of chaos, the queen of deception, had won. And as she raised her glass to the silent city, she knew, with absolute certainty, that her reign had only just begun. The serpent had shed its skin, and emerged, more beautiful and deadly than ever before. The end.